We got a great interview for you guys today. It's in fact a rockin' interview. Now, Chris, you'll get used to my awful puns if you stay here long enough. Krist Novoselic is the bass player, was the bass player for Nirvana, many other bands you might remember, such as Foo Fighters. He directed a movie called L7, The Beauty Process, but he mainly cares about these days electoral reform and why it's perfect that he's on here with us. He's the board chair of FairVote.org. He's also done a million other things, written a book, etc. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Chris, welcome to the Young Turks. How are you, man?
Hi, Cenk. I'm doing mighty fine. Thanks for having me.
It's funny, off camera, we've been talking about electoral reform this morning, or before we even started the interview. And of course, I remember you from, back when I was going to college, and you were rocking out pretty heavy, at the time.
I still try to rock out as much as possible.
Right, and then you
on
were...
the accordion, though.
Yeah, I heard about that. I'm going to get to that, too. So then you're in the studio looking like the most responsible political advocate I've ever seen in my life.
I appreciate your kind words.
All right, well, let's do it all. It's the tie. Okay. So as I like to do, let's start in the beginning and work our way through here. So where were you born?
I was born in Compton, California in 1965. And shortly after the Watts riots, and my parents moved to San Pedro, California, where I lived until I was 14 years old. Then we moved to Aberdeen, Washington. And I lived there for about a year, and my parents sent me to Yugoslavia, which was Croatia, was in Yugoslavia at the time, Zadar, on the Adriatic coast. I lived there for a year. Then I went back to Aberdeen. This was about 1981, and finished high school, got a job, joined a rock band. Then the next thing I knew, this rock band became the biggest band in the world.
Okay, so that's a fascinating story. Let's break it down one by one. First of all, I love that you're straight out of Compton. Okay.
And I voted for NWA for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year because I'm eligible.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's going to be really interesting because with all this, if they get inducted and well, they're going to perform. And then there's all this with their message about police and this and that. So
are people opposed to NWA being in the Rock and Roll Hall?
I haven't heard anything about it. I'm all for it.
They gotta be, don't they?
I love them.
I mean, they're legendary in terms of the music business and industry, but more importantly, the culture of music and what they spawned. So, but like if you had said musicians out of Compton, I don't think anybody would have guessed you.
I know, and that's what I'm saying. I'm not here like, they're my homies, like, they're not. I mean, but I love them.
Right. So at the time...
I've never claimed that,
Yeah, no, I know. So at the time, was Compton mixed race?
I don't remember.
Yeah, of course,
I
you were tiny,
was an infant,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now, they had you go back to Yugoslavia for what, a year, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's trippy. I mean, at the time, now it's Croatia, but at the time it was Yugoslavia.
Yes.
Were you cool with that? I mean, you're 15.
I loved it.
Uh-huh.
I loved it because, well, I don't even know if I had culture shock. I embraced a different culture, and I really got into it, and I liked it. It was good for me. I'm still fluent in Serbo-Croatian, and I think it's still part of me. I need to go back more often. But I came back to the United States and I participated in another culture, and it's something that maybe that's formed me as being an outsider, or I could look at society and things in another way. So.
See, that's really interesting. I've always had this idea that I want to do that's at this point pie in the sky, but that after everybody graduates high school, they should be. We should have 1 year of service. Now, you can do, if you want to do military, you can do military. If you want to do, Peace Corps, you can do Peace Corps. If you want to teach in America, the Clinton initiative that he started, you can do that. Pick one of those three. But for Christ's sake, one, interact with people outside of your circle, whether it's, if you're from the Bronx, kids from Kansas, vice versa, etc. And two, if you do the Peace Corps, that's great. Learn, because it makes you not worldly. Worldly is not the word I'm looking for. It just gives you that perspective that you just touched on, an outsider perspective, where you go, oh, I get it. There's a different way of doing things. Because that opens you up to everything. That's been my perspective, but that's what you're telling me now, that really opened you up in a lot of ways. And was it also the fact that you lived in LA area and Washington and
Yeah,
Yugoslavia?
that was a culture shock. I think the bigger culture shock was going from Los Angeles to the small town Aberdeen, because it was a lot different culturally back then. Things are more.
So how was Aberdeen?
Well, Aberdeen was kind of rough, and I like I love the rain and the history. I still live. I live hour south of Aberdeen. So I stuck around in Washington State. So I love it.
So why was it rough though? Was it just so like people were set in their ways, or?
I think so. Why was it rough? It was. I think it was just kind of different. You know what it was? It was the music sucked. Like the kids were really behind in music. Like, because I was into like FM radio, and they were still into AM.
Wow, that's old school.
Yeah, I was into Van
Like back
Halen.
when AM had music.
Yeah, and they were into Van Halen. I was into Van Halen, and they were like into Kenny Rogers.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Although I have some Kenny Rogers on my iTunes.
But then when I went to Yugoslavia, they were into punk rock, and so I was like, yeah, like what's this? It's the Clash.
Back then, when there was
the Clash, over a Clash. It's
the Clash. That sounds a little scary.
Yeah. Like, I love it. It's in English. Even Yugoslavian punk rock was really cool.
So, under communist rule at the time, back when there was a Soviet Union and Yugoslavia was one of its satellite countries.
Yugoslavia really wasn't a satellite of the Soviet Union. It was independent. Josip Broz Tito broke away from Stalin in 1949. So it was just kind of this independent country. And they had this really powerful military that was really expensive and I think helped bankrupt the country. And so it was independent from the Soviet Union and the West.
Yeah, I guess I was naturally skeptical about that. I mean, everybody says that, so I guess it's true. But I felt like, and it's probably my ignorance, it's in the region, it's communist.
It was communist. It was a different flavor of communism. I think they had more like kind of these the collective arrangements. I don't know a lot about it, but it wasn't Soviet communism.
Okay. So, and they had the Clash, so it's not so bad.
Clash. Yeah, they had a lot of Western music there.
So that gets us to Nirvana. So kind of. So how? That's the bridge. That's the jump that I'm fascinated by. Because at this point, everybody's relating to your story in some way. They've lived in a big city, a little city. They've traveled around. Maybe they lived abroad. Probably not. But you seem like an average kid who likes Van Halen and the Clash. How do you get in it? How does Nirvana start?
Well, Nirvana started. I met these fellow teenagers. They were in this band called the Melvins. It's like Buzz Osborne was the guru. And he turned me on to American hardcore music, which is like a second generation of punk in the United States, which is this really independent music. It wasn't on major labels. Like, The Clash was on like Epic Records, and the Butthole Surfers were on alternative. No, they weren't on Alternative Tentacles, Touch and Go or something. But there were these like independent record labels, and there was this whole scene that was independent. It wasn't part of the corporate structure. It wasn't part of the state structure. It wasn't part of the mainstream entertainment complex, and it was vital. And there was great music, and then there was this community of young people, and we'd go to rock shows, punk rock shows, and there'd be like fanzines. This was before the internet, okay? And so there was communication. Communing, people coming together at music shows, great music, inspiring music. And again, like that whole outsider thing, because I wasn't really, that was about 1983, 1984, and I wasn't really into Van Halen anymore, or like the rock music I was when I was in 15. Right. And so it seemed like this was something compelling for me, and I got into it. And I got into the music scene and the culture of it. And I met this other kid in Aberdeen. His name was Kurt Cobain.
Oh, he was in Aberdeen too?
He was in Aberdeen too. And we had this, shared this interest with this music. And I was playing guitar and he played guitar. And let's start a band. And we found a drummer. And then I started playing bass. And Kurt was very artistic, and he was always painting, sculpting, he was just writing music, always doing something. And so we started our band, and so that creativity came out, and we had our own identity.
So, and when do you hook up with Dave Grohl?
Dave Grohl was in 1990. We went through a few drummers, and Kurt and I drove to Los Angeles from Tacoma, Washington, which was like a 14-hour drive, and we just slept in our van on the parking lot on I-5 somewhere. We came here and we talked to some music industry people about getting a major label deal, because that at the time all these underground bands were getting deals on the major label. And so we got introduced to a few people, but we didn't have a drummer. And so we rushed down to LA because we had this opportunity. Susan Silver, who was managing Soundgarden at the time, she took us around and introduced us to folks. And then we took our leisurely drive back north, and like, let's stop in San Francisco and see Buzz and Dale from the Melvins, see our connection, our friends, lifelong friendships. And Buzz is like, hey, it was in North Beach up in San Francisco. Scream is playing. Oh, we love Scream. You know, a seminal punk rock band out of Washington, D.C., and they had this drummer who was really good and played this really big drum set. And I met him briefly, and we talked to Buzz. We're like, wow, what a cool drummer, and this and that. And then Kurt and I drove up 101. We went up north. I think we found a cat. Like, we were stopping, there was this cat. We stopped somewhere on this Oregon coast, and this cat came up. And so we found this cat, gave it a home or whatever. Well, I get these memories. And then we get a call from Buzz. It says, hey, man, Scream went down to LA after San Francisco, and their bass players split, and they're just broke at this at the singer's sister's house, who was a stripper, and then she owed money on rent, and so the landlord came and took the front door off the house. Okay, like,
I love this musician's life. Okay.
Yeah, and so Dave was stuck in LA, and he got enough money to get a plane ticket and his drum set, and he came up and started playing with us, and then we were hooked on him. It gelled right away.
So in '91, Nevermind comes out, it explodes.
Right.
You guys, in essence, at that point, become the largest band in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
So just walk me through that. How? First of all, how? Like, so what? Yeah.
How? That's a really good question, because we signed a deal with Geffen Records, and then, you know, we recorded our record, the record was released, and the label printed up 50,000 copies of our second record, Nevermind, you know, with the baby and everything on the cover, which was supposed to last us a couple years for sales-wise. But, you know, we were at the right place at the right time, had the right music. There's these, you know, bands that opened doors for us, like Jane's Addiction and Faith No More, were these alternative bands that were having hits on the radio. And so we had this single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and it had the energy and it spoke to people. And it was getting added on FM radio, because we were on tour playing these small clubs. And then the label guy would come by and say, hey man, you guys just got added on at like FM 100, you know, like, cool, okay. And then our video got on to MTV, and then we went on tour in Europe. And then we were hearing from folks, it's like, man, your video's like on MTV like every 5 minutes.
It was, I remember.
And we're like, oh, really? Like, we're in some club in Germany somewhere, like eating bratwurst and drinking beer or whatever. So, you know, 50,000 copies of Nevermind, and then the record was a phenomenon. And so people would go to their record store, remember those?
Yeah.
And they couldn't buy the record. And so the label's like scrambling, like, we got to get these records printed. And so, you know, that was part of the whole phenomenon. And then there was this whole new age of music came in. There was this new regime of like underground bands. And so what we tried to do was those values from being, you know, 1984 and the American hardcore underground scene. And so we were coming out saying, yeah, we love, you know, this is the new kind of music, and things kind of changed.
How many copies of Nevermind eventually sold?
I think I stopped counting after 10 million.
Is that amazing? They
All
started
those
with 50,000.
zeros, I'm just like,
Jesus. Okay.
Yeah,
so
it's a lot of
clearly
records,
you
yeah.
hit the zeitgeist at the exact right time. So that's a huge part of the how. I'm just randomly curious about this. But do you think you could have done it without Geffen Records?
I don't know. You know, there's those distribution channels. Back then, things were so centralized. And I've read these perspectives where Nirvana was the last pre-internet band, okay? And so back then in 1991, there was really no internet as we know it today, and there was a push regime, the push paradigm where you push things on people. But now, even with, you know, Young Turks here, we want to pull people in. It's
Right.
a different, it's totally different, okay? So with the internet and the age of communication, you want to pull people in. And so I don't know back in the push paradigm if we were able to pull people in, you know.
Right.
There are bands like Fugazi, Minor Threat, Pavement that were staunch independents, and they didn't want to go major label, and maybe they would have broken through at that time. But it's all speculation. I don't know.
Right. That's very interesting to me. Okay. So one more thing about Nirvana, which is what happened with fame, right? I'm always curious about that because you go from, you know, just, again, regular guys who love music, who are playing in this band, and you guys you and Kurt have known each other a long time from this small town, and then all of a sudden you are unbelievably famous. What happened next?
There's a lot of pressure, and then there's being like just living in this little counterculture world and then getting pulled into the mainstream. And it's just like, wow, all of a sudden, you know, we're the biggest band in the world, and there was a lot of pressure. And the most pressure was on Kurt. He was the singer, he was out there, the songwriter, and so he was under a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel? Did you feel in some ways elated? Oh my God, look at this.
I think looking back, I was just confused. And it took me a lot of years to kind of work through that. And I tried to do the best I could, you know, and we were the best. Nirvana was we were at our best when we were playing. We liked to rehearse, we liked to make songs and you know, play together. And that's what we did best. That's when we were happy.
And the rest was a whirlwind.
I have dreams about Kurt, and I'm so happy to see him when in a dream, like, oh my God, it's so good to see you. And then we're always like, well, okay, let's go play. We're always going to go play music, like, so there's some kind of connection there, which is good, and that's what it's all about.
That's great. So now afterwards, you wind up doing all these amazing different ventures, right? So out of the book, the movie, the other bands, what drew you the most? What was the thing that really got you excited?
Well, I've always been paid attention politically. Like, you know, I was 19 years old in 1984, and that was the first time I voted in my life. I voted for Walter Mondale for president.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah.
So you were the one.
What's that?
So you were the one that voted for Walter Mondale.
Yeah, the one. Yeah, he didn't win very good. I remember it was in a union hall in Aberdeen, and there was this huge portrait of Lyndon Johnson, like massive. And Lyndon Johnson's like this, walking out. Wow, like, who's that? He was president when I was born. Mm-hmm. But Great Society, right? And so I've also been, you know, try to pay attention politically, and it was in the early 90s where, you know, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, we were taking the world by storm. We were the leading bands, rock bands in the world. And, but in our own state of Washington, in the city of Seattle, we just weren't getting any respect. There's this, in Seattle, this teen dance ordinance where you were an adult between the age of 18 and 20. You were younger than 21 years old. You couldn't see most small-scale rock shows, okay, punk rock shows, whatever. There was just the rules against that. There was in the Washington State Legislature, there was the erotic music law. which turned into the Harmful to Minors bill, which was a censorship bill. Okay, and so, I was busy rocking the world, and there was a lot of people doing good work, working hard to oppose these laws. And then in '94, Kurt died, and the band was done, and I started to pay more attention, and I started associating with more of these activist people in regards to these laws. And so we started another group called JAMPAC, which is the Joint Artist and Music Promotions Political Action Committee, to be proactive, not just oppose these laws, but to be proactive with the music community. And we were for freedom of expression. We were for opportunities for entertainment and rock and roll for people of all ages. Our music community adds cultural and economic vitality to the region. We're an asset and not a liability. And we took this message to lawmakers, state agencies, people in the music community, the music industry, the music business, fans, music fans, okay? And people got inspired, saying, yeah, this is really cool. Like, how many other cities, there's a Chamber of Commerce and, economic development, what have you, like, wow, yeah, this is really cool. They have these bands bringing all this money into the region. Mm-hmm. That was paid by my grunge dollars, bought my house, remodeled my kitchen, okay?
Then they can get behind it.
Yeah.
There's money. Okay,
there's
right.
money, and then, and it's cool. And then we had, city councilors would say, I just came back from a trip in Australia, and people were just like, oh yeah, Seattle, Space Needle, Mount Rainier, Nirvana, And so why do you have this anti-music legislation? And so we eventually turned things around. We started working. It was a very, establishment effort, and now, we have like a rock and roll museum in Seattle. It's really cool. And then, so that's where I got my civic education. It's just like, well, how does that bill work in Olympia? How does things work on the city council? How do people get elected? How do people get involved? And there was, in the music, there was so much enthusiasm, okay? Like, there's these music fans, like, what can I do? It's like, how can I get involved? And then be like, well, why don't you vote? And then be like, oh, then this enthusiasm would wane. Mm-hmm. I'm like, come on, you got to vote. Your vote counts. Like, well, no, it doesn't. Like, yeah, it does. And they're like, oh, no, it doesn't. And then I looked into it, and I'm like, you're right. It doesn't really count, does it? You can vote, and it gets counted. They're good. The election administrators, they count your vote. It's transparent and this and that. But it doesn't really count. Like, this person gets elected with like 80% of the vote. And so, like, why is that? It's like, because this commission in Olympia, this commission of insiders, drew this district to make it benefit this type of voter. And it's like, oh, so that's how it works. And so I at the time, I was on Alta Vista. This is before Google. And I was on the internet. I was doing word searches, elections, election reform. And there's this one group in the United States, FairVote, the Center for Voting and Democracy. And I looked into it, and it's like, wow, we could do this in the United States. This isn't some weird European system. It's not a parliamentary system. It's like, no, this is established in the United States. It was started by John B. Anderson. He ran for president in 1980 as an independent. Mm-hmm. I'm into indie music, It makes sense. John is great. He's on our board. I'm the chair. So one thing leads to another. I started working with FairVote, and I eventually became the chair in 2008. John couldn't be the chair anymore. So right. I'm the chair now.
So when you wrote of grunge in government, let's fix this broken democracy. Right. So anybody talking about broken democracy, you've already got me on your side. I believe
Most
that 100%.
People, yeah.
Yeah. And so my research and analysis into that many years later led me to forming Wolfpack, which is a super PAC to get money out of politics. We believe in getting an amendment to fix the system and stuff. But your conclusions were similar, but also a little different. So what did you think were the primary problems as to why the votes didn't really count it?
Well, I think the primary problem is the emphasis on geographic representation. and which is important, okay? But it seems like that's the paramount emphasis, okay? Like geographic representation is you draw this district and voters get one representative for their district in the geography, in their area, okay? And so what does that tend to do? It tends to like benefit one type of voter. So you just get this majority who, you know, like in the United States, Democrats seem to be packed in these urban areas. And so the cities are Democratic and the countryside tends to be rural, okay? And so, you know, if geographic representation is so cool, why does when you watch the pundits and they always talk about some race, well, we're talking about the 6th district in Louisiana here, or we're talking about, you know, some Connecticut somewhere. It's just like, how was your election? If the emphasis on geography is so good, how was your election for U.S. House?
Entirely irrelevant. But it's interesting because I lived blocks away from the most interesting race in the country, was the 33rd District of California to replace Henry Waxman. And in fact, we held a debate in this room for 12 candidates in that race. But a couple blocks over is Karen Bass's district. She always wins. I voted for her. And she won easily, and it was a no contest.
And God bless her, not anything against her, but it's just like, yeah, I mean, see why people don't vote? Like my vote doesn't matter, okay? And so in the 33rd district, it was an interesting race until June. And this shows why the rules matter, because California has this top 2 election system, right? And so everybody runs in the primary. Then in June, there's a primary election, okay? And then the top 2 vote getters advance. They qualify for the general election in November. Then what happened was, it was a Republican and a Democrat, and the race was effectively over because the district's full of Democrats. Right. It would have been an interesting race, say if someone like Marianne Williamson, who's an independent, if she got in there. Or if there were 2 Democrats, because that's supposed to be the magic of top 2 elections, like getting 2 Democrats against each other, which I don't think is that magical. But it's voodoo. No, anyway, it can work. Okay, I don't want to put it down. I don't want to be a wet blanket or anything. But it shows you how the rules matter. And so this commission, and it's a way better system than it used to be in California, okay, because voters passed an initiative to where there's independent redistricting, and FairVote supports independent redistricting. It's good. But I think that independent redistricting and top 2 cannot overcome the single member district, this geographical representation with winner-take-all elections.
So I'm with you on, you know, the gerrymandering is, of course, is outrageous and ridiculous, and it, like you said, it packs everybody, all the Democratic voters into one city, and then they win in a landslide, but all those votes are wasted.
Yeah.
Before we came on air, you know, Krist was talking about the 2012 elections where the Democrats actually got more votes than the Republicans did in the House, but they overwhelmingly lost the House.
And how does that happen? How does that happen? Okay, in Seattle, Jim McDermott, he gets 80% of the vote, okay? He wins 80%. Then the turnout, because it's a presidential year, is like over 80%. It's just gangbusters, okay? And so that means he only needed 50% of the vote to win, because it's a winner-take-all deal. So that's 30% of this vote never really did anything. And so where I live, in the 3rd district in Southwest Washington State, that was made into a Republican district, okay? So Democrats won 40% of the vote there and didn't get anything. So do 40% plus 30%, that could have been a whole other seat for Democrats.
So what's the answer then?
The answer is proportional representation, and we call it fair representation voting. FairVote calls it fair representation voting because we want to point out the differences between our proposal and how people vote, say, in Europe and the rest of the world. Okay. Because fair representation voting is the American form of proportional representation, okay? So in Europe, you vote, or Israel, or Italy, you know, you vote for a party, right? In the United States, with fair representation voting, you vote for a person. It's candidate based. Okay? In Israel, it's like 3%, 2-3% to get elected. They're even raising their threshold now in Israel. And in Europe, it takes like 2-3-4% to get elected. Russia takes 8% to get elected to their Duma. Okay. Well, in the American versions, the thresholds are higher. They could be 33%, 25%, 20%, 11%. It depends on the district magnitude, which means the seats, how many seats are in a district. So it sees how I get wonky now, right? So let's imagine you go vote for Congress, and you live in a district where there's 3 seats, okay? So you get 1 vote to elect 3 seats, all right? And so what does that mean? It means it takes 25% of the vote, the threshold, to get elected. If you can get over 25% of the vote, you get elected. Okay.
So that injects new parties into the bloodstream. So a Green Party can get elected, for example.
If they can cross that threshold, with that high of a threshold, what usually happens is there would be, say in LA, there would be 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. Or you'd have Republicans coming out of the Bay Area. And then you'd have Democrats coming out of rural areas.
So in Aberdeen, you might have 2 Republicans and a Democrat instead of no Democratic representation at all, even though you've got about 40% of the Democratic vote.
We have Democrats in Aberdeen, but they have NRA endorsements. See how it's a different flavor?
Yeah.
And then you would have conservatives, not necessarily conservatives, but you'd have Republicans, like maybe a log cabin Republican coming out of LA or the Bay Area. It's a different ballgame. But what it is, it's full representation. And so you get 1 vote to like 3 seats, but that 1 vote is a potent vote, okay? And what it does is it puts power in the hands of the voter and not some commission in Sacramento or Olympia or wherever of these insiders, okay? It's the voters choose who represent them.
So let me throw a curveball here. So by the way, it's fairvote.org if you want to find out more about it and support it. It allows for more parties to get into the equation, and a lot of people are in favor of that. Now, as you say, it's not just for that. It's not just for that, right? It's just to get a better representation of who's actually in that community, right? But also it allows for other parties to have a chance, right? But then in Israel, Turkey, and a lot of these parliamentary systems, what winds up happening is then the parties start fracturing, right? So then you won't just have a Republican Party, you'll have a Tea Party, right? Democratic Party, Green Party, et cetera. And then once the great fracturing happens, the only guys who stay together are the fundamentalists. So that's why we have a fundamentalist right-wing leader in Turkey. We have not necessarily a religious fundamentalist in Netanyahu, but a right-wing fundamentalist in Netanyahu in Israel. And those guys, they vote like robots. And so I get concerned about it.
In Israel, they actually, in their next election, they're adjusting their threshold to go higher. Okay, so it's going to be up to, I think, 4% now, which is, compared to, what we could have in the United States. We do have this in the United States, by the way, in local elections. It's legal.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, this is established in the United States, and that's something, I'm going to answer your question about fractured legislatures, but it's usually in the Voting Rights Act where there's a settlement, there's a Section 2 case, and instead of drawing a majority-minority district, they go for these at-large, modified at-large districts, a 3-member district, 4-member district, 5-member district, whatever, or at just the whole jurisdictions at large, okay? You get like 1 vote to like 3 people, or you get 3 votes and you can kind of decide how you vote, or you can rank candidates, ranked choice voting. That's established in the United States. That's been held up by the courts, scrutinized by the courts. Scholarship, tons of scholarship about it. These are the 3 established voting systems. So now that's a good question about fractured legislatures, okay? And so people are, Israel, the Knesset is emblematic of that. And so they know that in Israel. So that's why they voted to raise the threshold. It's up to 4%. What's the effect of that going to be? I don't know. It might be bad for Arab parties because remember, Israel is the democracy in the Middle East. Okay, if you're an Arab Israeli citizen, you can vote for representation. But now they raised the threshold to keep they raised the threshold. Maybe that'll be bad for Arab parties. You know how politics are kind of give and take. Russia. Duma elections, they raised their threshold to 8%, okay? They got harassed by Council of Europe, wrote this report saying, that's too high of a threshold, you're excluding minor parties, this and that, but they have these crazy right-wing parties in Russia. It's like it's a Nazi flag, but instead of a swastika, it's a hammer and sickle. There's this skinhead party or whatever. They wanted to keep...
It's ironic.
They wanted to keep them out of the legislature. That's a good idea. It's okay to put brakes on things a little bit, but the sweet spot is the district magnitude, okay? It's just like, all right, is it 33%? Do we want 25%? Every time you make the district add more seats, the threshold goes down, okay? Got a 4-seat district, it'd be 20%.
So
15%, it depends.
So another issue here is, if we were to do this, and I want to get back to the example of the local people who are already doing it in the U.S., right? But if we do this, we still have the issue of who's going to win. Well, it appears right now, at least at the national level, 95% of the time in the House, for example, the person with more money wins, right? So you got all your great ideas. Nobody ever hears them because you don't have enough money to buy all those TV ads, et cetera. So is that another issue we have to tackle?
Well, this isn't a FairVote proposal. This is just Krist, and I agree with you with that. Money in politics is I'm really concerned about it, and things are out of balance. Okay, but again, let's look at the rules. All right, and so remember earlier when I talked about the push and the pull paradigm, where you used to push things on people. And it seems like that with politics is still in the 20th century where where do you raise all this money? What do you do with these millions of dollars? You hire consultants who take a piece of that for their commission. They take like 15% of every dollar that comes in.
It's unbelievable.
Okay? Okay. And then you go and you buy ads on TV. And it's just these crappy ads, over and over again. He kicked a kitty cat. He was busted in a, you know what I mean? All this negative, vote no for Joe Blow or whatever. You know what I mean?
If you were running, they'd be like, they'd take this interview and they'd be like, do you know that Novoselic kidnapped a cat on his way back home?
Kidnapped. I didn't do it. Then I'm on the defensive. I didn't do it. I tried to give it a nice home. I'm a humanitarian, really. I have goats and they're all rescue animals. All my dogs are rescue animals. Anyway, and so it seems like it's so expensive to do all this pushing, okay? And that's where all the money goes. Like I'm a pilot, like I fly a plane, and then I fly into Boeing Field in Seattle, and there's this news helicopter there for the local news station. It is the most amazing aircraft, and it has it's a multi-million-dollar aircraft, and it has its cameras and everything. And how much does it cost an hour to operate that thing? And where do they get the money for this? Campaign season.
That's exactly right.
They try to buy a 30-second ad during the local news, all right? It's crazy. So because they're trying to push these things, okay, on people. But what about the pull paradigm now? Now we're in the information age. We want to pull people in, okay? And people, now it's trying to happen. Lawrence Lessig tried to do it. With his trying to pull people in. Yep. We have the money bomb, Howard Dean in 2004, Ron Paul 2008, Obama for America, 2008. He didn't run as a Democrat. He ran OFA. And they have the O with the little American flag through it. It wasn't, it was like a de facto third party, okay? So I believe that whoever finds that sweet spot between political association and social networking will dominate politics for the next generation. Read Millennial Makeover by House and Winograd, these generational theorists. That's their idea.
You know, I never thought of the O being almost a de facto third party.
It was.
That's a great point.
I was involved in the Washington State Democratic Party at the time. Then we had these OFA people come and who are you? I was elected chair and they were elected state committee officer, and we have this, we're controlled by the state. which we're going to get into these rules now, but it's like OFA is just kind of just these hacks, okay? And so, there you have it. Like, we have the tools here with political association and social networking, but then we have the rules. Those are the tools. The rules are anti-association, okay? In most states, the states have a monopoly on political association. In California, you have to register your party association with the state because the state monopolizes political association. Then the state makes these ballots, these prefers party ballots, where the state does the nominations for a party. Democratic Party is private. Republican Party is a private. Those are private groups, okay? But they're not. They're synthesized with the state. Other states, you have used to have partisan primaries here in California, okay?
Yep.
Where you go and you get a ballot. It's a Democratic ballot, and you just vote. You can, in the primary, you can only vote for Democrats or only vote for Republicans. That's a state monopoly on association. Then you have ballot access rules, okay? In a lot of states, it takes thousands of signatures to qualify to get on the ballot, okay? And these are these roadblocks that contribute to people being out of whack. And so when you take a parties out of the equation, who fills the vacuum? Chamber of Commerce, unions, now the crankocrats, individual high donors, and people. And so
I hadn't heard that either.
Yeah, and crankocrats. Yeah, and so then you have, like, in 2008, you had some old black lady. She could give $10 to Obama for America, and she was like, "Yes, I'm going to give $10." There were so many people like that. Obama had money coming out of his ears. Okay? And see, the de facto third party, it's political association. And now, I'll finish my point here, and it goes back to when I was starting punk rock music. When I started in punk rock music and American hardcore, that we were associating, and we let the corporations go, we let the state go, we let the mainstream media go, and we just did our own thing, okay? And so what people need to do is to find something online, and they're trying to do it with no labels. They try to do it with the ruckus. There's all these people are trying to do some kind of like internet association, political association, but it's going to hit. And when it does, it's going to be a whole different ballgame because people are just going to send their $5, and it's going to be great.
You raised so many things there I want to talk about, but we'll run through them quickly. Obama, you voted for him in 2008.
And 12, I did too.
Yeah, so...
I should have voted Nader Gonzalez, because I really like Matt Gonzalez.
So are you disappointed with Obama?
No, not at all. I think he's really good. He's centrist. I support him on the immigration. The economy's good. Gas prices are low. Where did you go, America? Oh, then they bail on Obama. It's just like, I don't know. People,
That's interesting, but you also, I believe, supported Ron Paul in 2007, right?
No, I didn't support Ron Paul. And that's a big story. Is I gave him money because I was at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, and I'm in the lobby, and then there's a sign. In like an hour, Ron Paul and another libertarian thinker, author, they were appearing in the ballroom there. And so I wound my way through there, and I found this like ballroom, and there's all these people assembling, and then they were collecting money, and I thought it'd be the right thing to do if it was a fundraiser, is to, so I gave him $100. So that was my support for Ron Paul, but I'm not really a big Ron Paul supporter. There's things about him that I like. I'm an independent, and I try not to have these like cookie cutter political perspectives. I just, express what works for me. And I voted Republican before. I voted Democrat. A lot of times I skip things on the ballot because I'm not going to vote for any of these people. But I always vote. But I'll skip things, or I'll vote no if it's an initiative.
Well, I'm with you. We do a show where we talk about the news and, of course, a lot of politics, right? And I vote in every election. I encourage everybody to vote in an election. But in California, we vote on judges. We don't know anything about those judges. I mean, that's ridiculous that we're voting on judges.
And they're nonpartisan elections, too, so there's no
There's no guide. You have no way of knowing.
Yeah, it's hard because, you vote on judges, and that's a real populist idea. We vote on judges too in Washington State. But what's the flip side of that? Then they'd be appointees.
Yeah, no, I really
easy.
think voting on judges is misguided. I get why it started as a populist idea, but it winds up being the judge with the more money wins. And how are they going to get that money? By catering to the people who wind up in front of them in court. So I think that it winds up being a disastrous idea.
Yeah.
In the current system that we have.
Some places they have partisan judges. So at least the voters get a cue and know what they're voting for. It's going to be a Republican judge or a Democratic judge. That's some kind of deal. But I did research on a voting rights case in Washington State and this judicial election for the state Supreme Court. But anyway, one of the facts that I found out that the national average of the undervote for judges is about 25% of voters. They'll vote for president, they'll vote for Congress, and they start working their way down the ballot, and then it's just too much information after a while, and they just won't skip it.
No, honestly, I'm in that 25%. Partly out of a principle, like I refuse to vote for judges that I don't know anything about, and there's about 20 judges you vote on per election. What are you going to do? The average citizen is going to go study the 2 different choices in those 20 different judge races?
Well, and I believe that underscores my point about political association, because there's these groups that publish voters' guides, and if you support that group or if you agree with what they're proposing, that you can have a voters' guide, and you can just trust them. And that's why on the ballot, having that little D or R or G for Green Party or L for Libertarian or I for Independent, that's important for voters that's a cue for voters to make their choice, because that's the only place in the campaign where the voter is guaranteed to get information on the candidate. It's the ballot itself.
Yeah. So then go back to the idea of FairVote's idea already being implemented at the local level in places in the U.S. So how has that worked out?
Well, it's worked out for over 100 years. Cambridge, Massachusetts has ranked choice voting, the proportional version of it, and it works fine. What it does is it facilitates minority representation. And you have these voting rights cases, and nowhere in the Voting Rights Act does it say you need to make a majority-minority district. That comes out of the jurisprudence of the situation. So there's some places where it's hard to make this single-member district, and so they go to these alternative at-large systems. And what these systems do best is allow for minority representation. On local commissions in Connecticut, they use this single vote method. You get 1 vote to elect 3 people. In Pennsylvania, also, Philadelphia City Council, you get 3 votes to elect 5 people. Mm-hmm. So that's how they elect Republicans to the city council. Mm-hmm. It allows for so the voters decide who represents them, and not some commission who draws the maps, right, or insiders.
So that's interesting, because even if you remove money in politics and take all the other factors out, it's unquestionable that what your system does is it gives broader representation.
That's what it does.
It doesn't shut out a certain percentage of the voting population. So if it turns out you're in a close race, it's 52-48. In our current system, those 48%, nearly half of that district, will not be represented at all, right? But under your system, they're at least represented in some way.
Yeah, you would have somebody that you could call. You'd have 3 or 4 representatives, and there'd be that one person. We've done research with FairVote, and we found that these at-large systems, that they tend to elect more women, 20% more women. Mm-hmm. And so women are comfortable voting for other women, or they'd be comfortable for, you get this man who's your city councilor in your district. Instead, you'd have somebody to choose from, and maybe a woman would be more comfortable to call another woman.
All right. So we're pretty much out of time, but you mentioned 2 things that I super randomly wanted to tie together and ask you a question about. So you mentioned you have goats.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a farm, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned you're a pilot. Do you have a plane? Or?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So that, in some ways, you're living the dream. I mean, what your dream?
It's luxury.
Right? Yeah. So that leads me back. I've always just been curious. That's why I said it's random and not related to what we were just talking about. But so in music, do the royalties do they keep you living the dream forever?
Well, in my band, it does. And then I try to live frugal. Yeah, I mean, Nirvana is still a major band in the world. And we still, we know how to sell records. Like we'll make these like reissues and then there's merchandise. And I guess, people are downloading the music. And so Nirvana is still a very happening band, which is a real blessing.
So that's really interesting. So you don't have to do anything anymore. And that money will come in.
I have to money can go like water, okay? And there's like expenses and this and that. But actually, I don't live like in a big house, and I drive a 14-year-old car, have these older cars. I bought this $900 Volkswagen van. I mean, that's fine for me. It gets me to point A, point B. I splurge. I own a Cessna 182 plane, which isn't a jet. It's a single prop plane. And
right.
I can fly to California down here. I've flown many times down here, but the weather wasn't good. It's December, and so I wasn't comfortable with the weather, so I flew commercially. So I have my plane, and I have plenty of like guitars and instruments, so I don't need to spend money on things. I don't have a drug habit or alcoholism or anything like that, so.
Yeah. So that's the cool thing about music, though. I mean, you get in it because of your heart and what you want to do and what you love, right? But if it hits and it works, it at least takes care of you, maybe for the rest of your life.
Nirvana has, so God bless you, Kurt Cobain, Dave Grohl, and the fans who make all these opportunities for me. And I'm glad, hope it reciprocates that, people love the music and it means something for them. So that's a payday too.
And I love that you took that and you're doing something that matters for the country, Actually, one final question. If, for example, FairVote was to, this is a funny way of putting it, win, right? And we institute that system throughout the country, what would be a bigger accomplishment in your mind? What you guys did at Nirvana of capturing that moment in culture and representing those people? Because that's a real thing. It's not just that you guys had fun, right? But you represented a lot of people who felt that way, or to get this done.
I'm always proud of Nirvana. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Nirvana. So I'm always proud of that. And with voting reform, I can't do it alone. I mean, that's something. We're not crusading at FairVote. It's going to take time, and it's a lot of work, and we can't do it alone. So inviting you and viewers to join us, and let's change our broken democracy.
All right, Krist Novoselic, everybody check out fairvote.org. From one independent to another, thank you.